Welcome. If you're ready to hear the best story of your life, there is always death. After death, the dead have always knocked. The question is whether we shall ever answer. Long before film studios invented The Walking Dead, long before people coined the word zombie, ancient storytellers described a haunting possibility. A human returning from death, changed, part hero, part horror. Tonight we follow that first unnerving echo, a risen figure who stood between salvation and damnation, a tale that shaped fear across cultures. This is not just about corpses walking. This is about why death matters, and what happens when the boundary is broken. Picture a city of mud bricks, night pressing down on reed huts, a drumbeat in the distance, a lament whispered for the fallen, in the oldest tablets, in the mouths of priests and on the lips of old women, beside fires. The dead were never entirely gone. In Sumer and Akkad, in the long Nile Valley, and in the cold fjords, people told stories of bodies that would not stay down. They told of bargains, necromancy, gods robbed of their power, and heroes returned. Different, urgent, terrible. The first hero we will meet is not quite the cinematic ghoul you know. He is a man bound to memory and community, who fell and was summoned back. That summoning was not always a joyful reunion. Sometimes it was a payment. Sometimes it was a lesson carved in bone. We will follow 3 threads. The mythic accounts that sound like early zombie tales, the cultural meaning behind the risen one, and the echo this ancient fear left in how we imagine death today. Let us begin with Mesopotamia, the place where writing first made myth permanent. The Epic of Gilgamesh is famous for a king's search for immortality, but buried deeper in the clay tablets are hints of the dead returning, not as whole men, but as shadows of themselves. When Enkidu died, the world of Gilgamesh collapsed. The king begged the gods for restoration. The poets did not portray a clean resurrection. They hinted at liminal returns, voices from beyond, moments of presence that were not life. Listen to the way the Sumerians speak of the underworld, Kurnugi, the land of no return, where the departed exist in a dim twilight, eating dust. To the people who told these stories, being pulled back from that twilight was not a simple cure. It was an unnatural theft from the natural order. Next, slide down the map to the Levant and the tale of Baal and Mot. In Ugaritic songs, Mot is death personified, an indifferent digestive force. When Baal confronts Mot, the language turns visceral. To be swallowed by Mot is to be consumed into the fertility cycle itself. Some scholars read these texts as seasonal myth. Summer dies and returns. But listen closer and you hear an earlier terror. A king or warrior ripped from life not by age but by a cosmic appetite. Return from Mort is not always a return to the world of the living. Sometimes it is a return as something changed, tasked, or punished. Cross the Mediterranean to Egypt and the uncanny care the Egyptians paid to the boundary between life and death. They wrapped their dead in linen, recited spells and wrote instructions on papyrus. Procedures designed to keep the dead where they should be. But Egyptian spells also acknowledge the opposite fear. The Book of the Dead contains spells to repel the Tate, the shambling dead, and incantations to stop tomb desecration because the dead can be dangerous if dislodged. The Egyptians were pragmatic. Preservation was piety, but the dead must be managed. A body disturbed could become a hostile presence, a polluting force, or even an agent for curses. The mummy in the tomb is both a promise of survival and a horror story waiting to spiral into life again. In Greece, there are echoes too. Not so much of shambling corpses, but of souls that do not rest. The Greek hero myth sometimes returns the dead to speak, to prophesy, or to condemn. Odysseus travels to the land of the dead and meets shades that require libations. The shades are faded, but they can still harm the living with wrath or curse. The most chilling Greek motif is not the body that walks, but the spoken return. Voices that linger, secrets that refuse silence. This another form of undead, a presence that should have passed but refuses to leave the world of men. Move north and you find the Norse Draga, Agas of the grave who rise from burial mounds with strength and malice. Draga are corporeal, often swollen with the water of the grave, and they guard their hoards. People feared them because they blended the physical danger of a living enemy with supernatural violence. They were jealous of the living and could bring disease and ruin. For the Norse, the dead could literally put their feet on the ground again. That image, the corpse that can seize and kill, becomes a vivid ancestor to modern zombies. So where does the first zombie fit into all of this? There are competing candidates across cultures. The Enkidu episode of pleading and partial return, the Baal and Mot cycle, Egyptian tales of the disturbed dead, and the Norse Draga. But one figure stands out in the way later cultures remember resurrection that goes wrong. A hero or warrior who returns to protect his people, but in protecting them is changed, less human, more driven, and a living reminder that the natural order has been broken. Imagine that hero, a man who once laughed and ate, who loved, who slept beside his wife. He falls in battle. His community keeps a ritual, one that is both prayer and machine. They invoke names, pour libations, chisel marks, and pierce his grave with the haft of a spear, not to hurt, but to call. We see his return as mist at first, a breath, a hand lifting from earth. When his eyes open, there is a difference. His skin is pale, his gait strange, and his mouth tastes of dust. He remembers, but only in fragments. He speaks in bursts, with a voice that carries death in its consonants. People cheer, they weep, but soon they notice small things. He does not laugh at jokes. He stares into corners. He eats, but with no pleasure. Sometimes he bites meat with an absent fury. These telltale signs, partial memory, appetite, absence of joy, are the earliest blueprint for what later ages would call undead. Why would a community do this? Sometimes it is a bargain. The dead hero returns to hold a border during famine, or to lead a desperate charge. In times of crisis, the living will accept transgression for the sake of survival. We have evidence, rituals, incantations, and texts suggesting that people try to import power by any means necessary. These acts show both desperation and hubris, human hands prying open doors that gods had closed. But the mythmakers always inserted punishment or caution into the tale. The returned hero was rarely wholly in control. In some traditions, those who touch this returned soul are struck with disease. In others, the hero becomes merciless, executing a judgment with a sharpness that once saved his people and now obliterates them. The moral is blunt. To cheat death is to court a different kind of death. For individual morality, for community stability, for innocence. we should pause and ask, why does this motif recur so often and in so many places? Scholars suggest different answers. Some see ecology and disease, corpses burying the living in the reality of plagues and contagion. Others see political metaphors, leaders so obsessed with saving their rule that they command the return of the old order, thereby resisting necessary change. Yet another reading is psychological. Death is the great boundary that gives life urgency, and myth uses the undead to dramatize what happens when that boundary collapses. The zombie myth is an embodied anxiety about memory, trauma, and the refusal to let go. To make this concrete, let us reconstruct one plausible ancient scenario. A city is besieged. Bodies pile. The priesthood, traditional keepers of the boundary, prepares a ritual, a mixture of herbs, a chant, a knife dipped in liquor, and the repetition of the hero's name. The purpose is not merely to recall, it is to bind. The living hope to harness courage and old valor again. The corpse rises, and in that first hour, the guard lines hold. But by the third day, the risen man cannot sleep, cannot leave the smell of the battlefield, and begins to lash out at anyone who speaks in grief. The city is saved, but the price is the slow erosion of what that city once was. Mourning stops. It is replaced by a mechanical readiness. The memories harden into command, and children taste the iron of war in their mouths. And here the myth performs its moral function. Communities that refuse to accept loss become communities that accept cruelty. The rising may have tactical value, but it slowly eats the social fabric. That is a terrifying idea. Immortality used as a tool, but the tool reshapes the hands that hold it. Across time, the motif evolves. In medieval and early modern Europe, revenants are punished by church rites, exorcism, special burial practices, and prayers. In Haiti, the notion of the zombie evolves under different social pressures, slavery, colonialism, and the need to explain the brutal dehumanization people observed. Modern cinematic zombies, plagues, contagion, consumerism are the latest cultural mirrors. Every age reshapes the undead to reveal what frightens them most. If you've watched zombie films, you will recognize how much of that template is ancient. The hunger, the blank stare, the contagion. These are not simply horror tropes invented by 20th century writers. They are deep, primal images that helped ancient people dramatize trauma and social breakdown in the absence of modern science. Today, the zombie image mutates again. It is public health panic, political paralysis, the endless retelling of catastrophe across screens. But at the center remains a human kernel. The fear that what we love may return twisted, and that our hands might be the ones to pull it back. Before we move to the closing, let me ask you quietly, because these are not academic curiosities only. Would you call someone back if it meant saving your village? Would you take the risk of a life without rest, so that your children might live another season? These are terrible choices, and myth insists on asking them because they reveal what we value. Do we value continuity over change, strength over grief, command over tenderness? If you're hooked and want deep dives like this, historical sources, text readings, and the eerie artifacts behind these stories, subscribe now. I dig into tablets, scrolls, and the shadows where these stories hide. Join us and bring a friend who loves the dark corners of history. In the final stretch, we take stock. The first zombie is not a single corpse in a single tomb. It is a pattern, a ritual impulse in crisis, a communal attempt to resist loss, and a mythic form that warns against overreaching. Whether in the clay tablets of the Mesopotamians, the tomb spells of Egypt, the Norse mounds of the north, or the later revenant tales of Europe, the same terror returns. That death might be undone, and if so, humanity must pay. So, what is the lesson carved into these cold stones? Perhaps this: to live fully is to accept the boundary of death, and to love what slips away. When people refuse that boundary, they risk making monsters of the very things they seek to preserve. The returned hero may save one battle, but he costs 1,000 human sunsets. Now go and look, visit a museum, read a tablet translation. Notice how often the ancient peoples insist on ritual, on boundary, on ceremony. They did not merely fear the dead, they feared themselves, people who would not let go. That fear made them invent monsters that would remind them why goodbye matters. If this story gripped you, if you felt the chill of a hand lifting from the earth, please like the video, share it with someone who likes history that feels alive, and subscribe for more episodes. We bring the old tablets to life and examine the questions they dare to ask. Leave a comment. Which culture's risen dead scares you most? And would you resurrect someone to save your people? I'll read the best answers and feature them next time. The dead have always known. The question is whether we shall